The sound of shattering glass woke me up from a deep sleep at 2:17 a.m. I sat up in bed in a jolt, my heart racing. My home, located in the Alameda dos Ciprestes condo, had always been my little haven of peace until that moment. I grabbed my cell phone from the bedside table and quickly activated the security app as I moved silently down the hall. The camera showed 3 men in navy blue uniforms from the Homeowners Association entering through the back door. Subscribe to the channel and leave your like to get access to more stories like this. He must be in the office. The informant said he keeps everything in the safe. One of them whispered, a bald man in his 50s that I recognized as Robert Jenkins, the HOA president. I froze. What did they want in my safe? I slid over to the closet in the hallway and grabbed the baseball bat I kept there for emergencies. My security system had already been silently activated, something that Jenkins and his cronies had no idea about. When I moved to this condo 3 years ago, after 2 decades working as a security consultant for federal agencies, I kept some connections. My system wasn't just hooked up to a regular monitoring center, it was connected directly to the local branch of the Department of Homeland Security. Anderson. "We know you're home," shouted Jenkins, as the 3 of them ransacked my office. "Just hand over the documents and no one gets hurt." Documents? What documents? In recent months, I'd noticed irregularities in the condo fees, astronomical amounts being charged for minor infractions. I'd started investigating on my own, but apparently, I was messing with something bigger than I thought. "Break down the safe if you have to," ordered Jenkins. "We don't have much time." I stayed hidden, watching on my phone as the men wrecked my office. The safe, built into the wall behind a painting, still hadn't been found. Sirens in the distance. Jenkins froze. "What the hell is that?" he asked, visibly alarmed. I smiled. It had been 6 minutes since the silent alarm had been triggered. The response time was exactly as expected. "Shit, we need to get out of here," one of the men shouted. "Not without those documents," Jenkins insisted, out of control. When they tried to escape through the back, it was already too late. Blue and red strobe lights lit up the entire yard. Armed agents surrounded the property. "Department of Homeland Security. Stop right there. Hands up." Jenkins looked at me when I finally showed up, his eyes wide in surprise. "How?" "Looks like you didn't do your homework, Jenkins," I replied calmly. Agent Harrison, a medium-built man with a serious look, led the preliminary questioning in my living room, while the 3 intruders waited in handcuffs under the watch of other agents. "Mr. Anderson, do you have any idea what they were looking for?" Harrison asked. "Not exactly, but I've noticed irregularities in the HOA charges. Ridiculous fines for infractions I didn't even commit." Harrison nodded thoughtfully. "We've received similar complaints from other condos managed by the same group. We suspect a money laundering scheme running through these associations." The next morning, Jessica Reynolds, a lawyer specializing in real estate law, sat down in front of me with an impressive dossier. "Mr. Anderson, what happened at your place wasn't an isolated incident. We've been building a case for months against this organization. What started as abusive HOA fines evolved into systematic intimidation and now, a home invasion." She opened a folder full of documents. "We believe Jenkins and his crew use the condos to launder money from illegal operations. They force homeowners to sell for below market value through rising fines and then resell the properties for huge profits." "And what were they looking for in my safe?" I asked. "They probably thought you had proof. Someone with your background as a federal consultant must have raised eyebrows when you started asking questions." Harrison, who had joined us, added, "Jenkins is denying everything, of course. He claims he was just inspecting your property because he suspected you of breaking the condo rules." "In the middle of the night? Breaking a window?" I asked in disbelief. "Exactly," Jessica replied with a determined smile. "That's why we're going to take them down in court." 6 weeks had passed since the invasion. The federal courthouse was packed when I walked in, adjusting a tie I rarely wore. Jessica was by my side, carrying her leather folder with meticulously organized documents. Our steps echoed on the marble floor as we headed toward the prosecution's table. At the other end of the central hallway, Robert Jenkins sat with his lawyer, Thomas Wilson, a gray-haired man in an impeccable suit radiating confidence. Jenkins glared at me with a mix of anger and contempt as I passed, but I deliberately looked away. That wasn't the time for provocation. "Everyone rise for Judge Eleanor Blackwell's entrance," announced the bailiff. The judge, a woman in her 60s with a stern expression, took her seat and began the proceedings. James Matthews, the prosecutor assigned to the case, stood up to deliver his opening statement. "Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this case isn't just about a home invasion. It's about abuse of power, systematic extortion, and a criminal network operating under the guise of a respectable homeowners association." Matthews walked slowly in front of the jury, his voice gradually gaining intensity. "The evidence will show that the defendant, Robert Jenkins, along with his associates, turned what should have been a community organization into a tool for intimidation and extortion. And when Mr. Anderson began questioning the irregular practices, the defendant chose to break into his home in the middle of the night, searching for documents that could incriminate him." Wilson got up right after, adjusting his glasses before addressing the jury. "What we have here is a simple misunderstanding. Mr. Jenkins, as the elected president of the HOA, has the responsibility and the right to inspect properties when there are suspicions of serious violations of the condo rules. Yes, the timing was off, and for that my client apologizes, but he acted within the privileges granted by his position." I held back a bitter laugh. "Privileges? Breaking windows and invading homes at night are now considered privileges?" When I was called to testify, I felt the weight of a dozen pairs of eyes from the jury on me. I detailed the events of that night, the ridiculous fines I'd started to question, and the veiled threats I had received in the preceding weeks. "Mr. Anderson," Matthews began, "could you explain to the jury why your security system is connected to the Department of Homeland Security? I worked as a security consultant for several federal agencies for 20 years. Part of my job involved assessing vulnerabilities in critical infrastructures. When I retired, I kept some connections for personal security reasons, given the sensitive nature of some projects I was involved in." Wilson stood up for cross-examination, trying to undermine my credibility. "Mr. Anderson, don't you think it's a bit convenient that someone investigating alleged irregularities has a security system connected directly to federal agencies? Wouldn't that be a form of intimidation against the condo management?" I kept my cool. My system was installed long before any issues with the HOA came up. And I should add that if there hadn't been a home invasion, this system would never have been triggered. The testimonies went on for days. The prosecution presented financial records showing how the condo fines had increased by 300% since Jenkins took over as president. Former residents recounted how they were forced to sell their homes after being bombarded with inexplicable fines that quickly escalated to unpayable amounts. A former HOA accountant, protected by a plea deal, revealed how the fines money was diverted to shell companies and then returned as investments in condo improvements that never actually materialized. On the fourth day of the trial, Jessica showed me documents that had been seized from Jenkins's office. "Look at this," she said, pointing to a detailed spreadsheet. They had a list of targets. Homeowners they considered problematic or whose houses they wanted to acquire because of their strategic locations. "Your name is here, marked as a high priority." "Why would I be high priority?" "Your house is at the entrance of the condo." According to notes in other documents, they planned to turn that area into a commercial complex once they had acquired the properties. When Jenkins was called to testify, his arrogance was less apparent. Nevertheless, he stuck to the story that he was simply doing his duty as HOA president. "Mr. Jenkins," Matthews asked, "can you cite which rule in the association's bylaws authorizes nighttime home invasions of residents' houses?" "It wasn't an invasion," protested Jenkins. "It was an emergency inspection based on information that Mr. Anderson was seriously violating the condo rules." "And what serious violation would justify breaking a window at 2 in the morning?" Jenkins hesitated. We had reason to believe that he was forging documents against the association. Documents that, oddly enough, you and your associates were desperately searching for in his safe, right? Jenkins's face turned red. We were protecting the integrity of the association. Then Matthews showed security camera footage, clearly displaying Jenkins instructing the others to specifically look for documents in the safe. The audio captured his exact words, "Find those damn records before he turns them over to the authorities." The trial lasted 2 weeks. Every day revealed a new layer of the criminal scheme. The defense tried to discredit the evidence, arguing that the recordings were illegally obtained, but Judge Blackwell decided that since it was my house, I had every right to record what was happening inside it. On the second to last day, during the closing arguments, Wilson made one last desperate attempt. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, regardless of how you feel about Mr. Jenkins's administrative practices, we need to stick to the facts of this specific case. Yes, he entered Mr. Anderson's property at an inappropriate hour. Yes, there was property damage. But nothing was stolen, no one was hurt, and he genuinely believed he was acting within the bounds of his authority as HOA president." Matthews responded forcefully. The defendant wasn't acting within his authority. He was running a criminal organization that used arbitrary rules and abusive fines to extort and intimidate homeowners. When Mr. Anderson started questioning these practices, the response was a home invasion in the middle of the night. This isn't condo management, it's organized crime. The jury deliberated for only 4 hours before returning with the verdict. When the judge asked the jury foreman to pronounce it, I felt Jessica squeeze my arm in anticipation. On the charge of home invasion with criminal intent, how does the jury rule? Guilty, Your Honor. On the charge of ongoing extortion, how does the jury rule? Guilty, Your Honor. On the charge of conspiracy to commit financial crimes, how does the jury rule? Guilty, Your Honor. Each declaration of guilt was met with a heavy silence in the room. Jenkins remained impassive, but I noticed his hands trembling slightly on the table. The sentence was handed down the following week. Jenkins received 25 years in prison without the possibility of parole. His 2 associates, who had accepted plea deals, got lighter but still significant sentences. As I left the courthouse after the sentence, Harrison approached me in the parking lot. "Mr. Anderson, we have some news we need to discuss." We sat at a nearby cafe, where he opened his laptop and showed me a series of documents and photographs. The Jenkins case has opened up a Pandora's box. We discovered connections with other HOAs in at least 6 states, all operating with the same modus operandi. We believe we're dealing with a national network of extortion and money laundering using homeowners associations as a front. I looked at the photos, recognizing some familiar faces from HOA meetings I'd attended. Jenkins started talking, Harrison continued. He realized he was going to spend decades in prison and decided he didn't want to go down alone. He began naming people, including some you know. Who? Councilman Thomas Mitchell, for starters. Apparently, he's one of the main beneficiaries of the scheme. And there are other even more surprising names that we're investigating. I felt a mix of vindication and apprehension. Justice was being served, but clearly, this was just the tip of the iceberg. "We'll need your testimony again," Harrison said. "This is going to get a lot bigger before it's done." The FBI office in Salt Lake City looked like a beehive of activity when I arrived for my 3rd meeting in 2 weeks. Agents were hustling between desks, carrying folders and whispering information. Harrison guided me through a maze of cubicles to a conference room where Jessica was already waiting with 2 agents I didn't know. "Mr. Anderson, I'd like to introduce you to Special Agent Diana Chen from the Financial Crimes Division and Agent Michael Reeves from the Public Corruption Task Force," said Harrison, closing the door behind us. Chen, a woman with an analytical expression and impeccable posture, extended her hand. "Mr. Anderson, your case has opened the door for one of the largest investigations into real estate corruption in recent years." Reeves, an African-American man in his mid-40s with a gold badge on his lapel, nodded in agreement. "What started as a home invasion has uncovered a scheme that spans the entire country. On the central table, a digital map of the United States displayed dozens of pulsing red dots, each representing a HOA suspected of involvement in the scheme. "Jenkins is cooperating more than we expected," Harrison continued, tapping on a tablet that projected documents onto the wall screen. He provided names, dates, meeting locations, and most importantly, the complete mechanism of how the operation worked. Chen took over the explanation. The scheme was sophisticated, but it followed a consistent pattern. First, they identified condos in rapidly appreciating areas. They infiltrated board members into the HOAs or bribed existing directors. Then, they started imposing increasingly restrictive rules and abusive fines. When a homeowner became a target, usually because their property was strategically located or because they questioned the HOA's practices, they would launch a campaign of regulatory harassment, Reeves continued. Daily fines for trivial or non-existent infractions that quickly escalated to astronomical amounts. Jessica opened a folder and slid some documents toward me. "Look at this, we got access to your HOA's complete records." In 3 years, they collected over $4.7 million just in fines, but the official financial reports only show $1.2 million. "And the rest?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer. "Classic money laundering," Chen replied. The money was diverted to shell companies that supposedly provided services to the condo, landscaping, security, renovations. Those companies would then transfer the money to offshore accounts, which eventually funded legitimate real estate investments. Harrison projected a complex chart on the screen. "This is the organizational map we've put together so far." Jenkins was at the 3rd level. Above him, we have Douglas Farrell, a Boston real estate developer who controlled operations along the East Coast, and Anthony Vasquez, who was in charge of the West Coast. "And at the top?" I asked, noticing the question mark at the top of the chart. The 3 agents exchanged cautious looks before Harrison answered. "Jenkins consistently mentioned someone he only calls the senator, but so far, we haven't been able to definitively identify who it could be. We have 3 main suspects, all connected to the Senate's Housing Committee." Reeves intervened. "That's where your input becomes crucial, Mr. Anderson. Jenkins insists that he never met the senator in person, but he claims that this person was present at a fundraising event held at your condo last year." Jessica looked at me meaningfully. "The charity event for the Bright Futures Foundation, remember? You mentioned to me that there were several politicians there." I recalled the event, a gala night in the common area gardens of the condo. As a new resident not yet involved in any conflicts with the HOA, I had been invited and I attended briefly. "Yeah, I was there for about an hour. I saw a few familiar local political faces, but I don't recall any federal senators." Chen slid 3 photographs across the table. "Was any of these men present?" I examined the images carefully, 3 middle-aged, white senators, all sporting the same rehearsed smile typical of career politicians. I paused on the 3rd photo. This one was there. Senator William Harrington. I had a brief chat with him about infrastructure security. He seemed particularly interested when I mentioned my previous work as a federal consultant. Harrison exchanged knowing looks with his colleagues. Harrington is a senior member of the Housing and Urban Development Committee. He also chairs the Real Estate Regulation Subcommittee. And interestingly, Reeves added, he sponsored 3 bills in the last 5 years that significantly bolstered the legal powers of HOAs across the country. A heavy silence fell over the room as we absorbed the implications. We were potentially dealing with corruption at the highest legislative level. "This is way bigger than I imagined," I finally admitted. "That's exactly why we need to proceed with extreme caution," Chen replied. "Accusing a sitting senator requires irrefutable evidence. Jenkins is an important witness, but his credibility is compromised by his own criminal involvement." Harrison placed a digital recorder in the center of the table. "Mr. Anderson, we need your formal statement about that event, any interactions you had with Harrington, and anything you might have noticed about his relationship with Jenkins or other HOA members." For the next 2 hours, I detailed every memory of that night, with every word recorded and transcribed by a court reporter present. I mentioned how Jenkins seemed particularly deferential when speaking with Harrington, almost subservient, an unusual behavior for someone normally so arrogant. As we wrapped up the session, Chen received a message on her phone and frowned. Farrell was found dead in his home in Boston. Apparent suicide. Harrison muttered a curse. A convenient suicide, I'd say. Things are escalating, Reeves observed gravely. If Harrington really is involved and feels the noose tightening. Is my safety at risk? I asked directly. As a precaution, we'd like to offer you temporary protection, Harrison replied. Jenkins is in federal custody, but other members of the organization are still at large. The following week, while a discreet team of agents took turns watching my house, I received even more disturbing news. Jenkins had been transferred to another facility after a supposed threat to his safety, and during transport, the vehicle was attacked. 2 agents were injured, and Jenkins barely escaped. This wasn't a coincidence, Jessica stated when she visited me to discuss the developments. Someone powerful feels threatened and is taking drastic measures. What does this mean for the case? It means we're on the right track, she replied with fierce determination. And it also means we need to speed things up. The task force is working to get authorization to investigate Harrington's campaign finances. If we find connections with the shell companies identified in the HOA scheme. An agent rushed into the room, interrupting our conversation. Mr. Anderson, we have a situation. 3 unidentified vehicles have just entered the condo and are heading this way. Through the security cameras, we saw 3 black SUVs with tinted windows stopping in front of my house. Men in dark suits got out of the vehicles, apparently armed. Immediate evacuation, the agent ordered, quickly leading us to the back of the house. As we moved toward an unmarked vehicle parked on the side street, I heard the distinct sound of glass breaking, another invasion, this time with potentially more serious consequences than missing documents. This is no longer just about a corrupt HOA, Harrison said when we met in a safe house on the outskirts of town. You've become a direct threat to powerful people, Anderson. What happens now? I asked, watching agents set up security perimeters around the property. Now, he replied with grim determination, we're entering the witness protection program while we build a federal case against one of the most influential senators in the country. Jessica, who had been with us, added, and we'll sue every last one of them. Not just for home invasion or extortion, but for federal conspiracy, racketeer influenced and corrupt organizations act, wire fraud, and obstruction of justice. Reeves entered the room carrying a laptop. We have news. The forensics team found a hidden safe in Jenkins's office. Inside, there were detailed records of payments to various politicians, including 3 sizable transfers to a foundation controlled by Senator Harrington's wife. Is this enough for a warrant? Harrison asked anxiously. Judge Robertson just gave the green light. Teams are on their way to Harrington's office in Washington and his residence in Virginia right now. I looked at the muted news on the room's television, where live footage showed my house surrounded by federal agents and official vehicles. A ticker at the bottom of the screen announced, Federal Operation Dismantles National Scheme Involving Homeowners Associations. How long until Harrington's name goes public? I asked. If the safe's evidence checks out, it'll be a matter of hours, Chen replied, who had just joined us. But this is only the first phase. From the notes we've analyzed from Jenkins, the HOA scheme is just one facet of a much larger operation involving real estate fraud, bribery of zoning officials, and bid rigging. Harrison put a hand on my shoulder. You started something much bigger than you could have imagined, Anderson. And now there's no turning back. I never meant to become an informant against a US senator, I replied with a humorless laugh. I just wanted to figure out why my condo fees went up by 300% in 6 months. Sometimes, Jessica mused, pulling one loose thread ends up unraveling the whole sweater.